All right, U.S. history students, we are going to move on to the social reform period that occurs during the antebellum era. So during the early antebellum era from 1800 to 1840, a number of social reformers fought to bring an end to a wide variety of social ills. So essentially what this means is there were people living in the United States who wanted to change situations that they thought were bad for the American people. And they are successful to varying degrees, but each in their own way make a significant impact on our country. All right, so the first problem is a problem of religion and church attendance and religious faith. So Evangelist Charles Finney, and you can see his name here at the bottom, is one of the leaders of the Second Great Awakening. So the First Great Awakening was the first period of religious revival in the United States. And then in the early antebellum period, we have the Second Great Awakening, which is a similar religious revival experience. And Charles Finney said, there are many people who know that they ought to be religious, but they are afraid if they become faithful, they shall be laughed at by their companions. Such persons never will give up their false shame until they are so excited that they can no longer contain themselves any longer. By 1800, church membership in the United States was low and falling. Just 1 out of 15 people in America was a member of a church and attended regularly. Poverty and crime and what they called immorality seemed to be increasing at an alarming rate. So what they were seeing is a decline in church membership and a rise in poverty and crime. And people who were involved in the Second Great Awakening believed that these two things were tied together, that if they could increase church membership, then maybe things like poverty and crime would go down. The second problem of the era goes back to what they called immorality, and that was a problem of excessive drinking. The amount of alcohol consumed during this time period and in history greatly dwarfs what we would consider to be heavy drinking today. Alcoholism and use of alcohol was so pervasive in the United States during this period that it was not uncommon to see people drunk and alcohol being used to excess in a lot of different places. And so this image depicts the problem of alcoholism with step one, you have a glass, you're getting involved, you're starting to have a good time with your friends, but eventually having a good time is going to result in poverty, in losing your friends, and desperation and crime, and then ultimately death. If you can see this image, this guy's shooting himself. So they showed a very terrible path related to alcoholism. And so the movement to stop excessive alcohol use was called the temperance movement. By 1800, alcohol abuse was seen as a serious problem. Whiskey was cheap to make and easy to buy. By 1820, the typical adult drank more than 7 gallons of alcohol per year. The average today is 2.6 gallons, so that is a significant difference to the amount of alcohol we drink today. Alcohol was linked to crime, debt, abuse, and work problems. Another problem in the United States at the time was the quality of our education system. So this quote from the Working Man's Advocate in 1830 says, "The elementary schools throughout the state are irresponsible institutions established by individuals from mere motives of private profit, who are sometimes lacking character and abilities. Ignorance, inattention, and even immorality prevail to a sad extent among their teachers. So basically what this quote is saying is that elementary schools are run not for the purpose of educating children, but for the purpose of making money, and that the people who worked there were often unqualified, or people who may not necessarily need to be around children. By 1800, the United States did not have a true education system for children. Massachusetts and Vermont were the only states with compulsory attendance laws. And if you remember back in our colonial unit, Massachusetts was the first colony to have mandatory school requirements. If you remember, it would depend on the size of the town, whether there was an elementary or a grammar school required. In most states, classes were not divided by age. So if you look in this image, you have a single school teacher teaching children of varying ages and abilities. Few children attended school past the age of 10. So the average education level in the United States was quite low. So when you combine things like rampant alcohol use and low education, you are likely to see some of the problems that were plaguing the United States at the time, including debt, poverty, and crime. The fourth problem was lack of rights available to women. So women were unable to vote. Single women could own their own property. Married women, however, had no control over their property or their children. Women could not initiate or begin a divorce proceeding, and women could not sign a contract or sue in a court without her husband's permission. Women's opportunities were limited something by the cult of domesticity. Women were expected to oversee the family and home while their husbands worked to provide money. Married women had no property rights and could not file for divorce even if they were in an abusive relationship. Women could not vote, they could not run for political office, and they could not sue someone in court. So women were very much the property of their husbands and had limited ability to protect themselves if the situation with their husband turned violent or dangerous, or if their husband died. The fifth problem was that of slavery. King Cotton, under the expansion of King Cotton through the use of the cotton gin, led to a huge growth of slavery. By the 1830s, all northern states had abolished slavery, and slave rebellions and escape through the Underground Railroad became more common. But even though slavery was banned, not all Northerners at the time believed that slavery was immoral. However, Northerners were coming to this conclusion. All right, the sixth problem. So before 1800, America was not very democratic. Most states restricted voting rights to men who were white and owned property. So they restricted voting to white men by requiring property and certain tax qualifications. And as a result, less than 50% of white men in the United States could vote. So what you found were the rich men who were voting and making decisions for everyone else in the country. As you can imagine, farmers and people of limited means at the time are going to have problems with this, and we're going to see a push to remove the property ownership requirement from voting, and a push towards what is called universal male suffrage, that all white men, regardless of their property ownership status, would be able to vote.